It's the most important election of our lifetime. We've heard it 1,000 times, but this time it might actually be true. Chris Bedford, senior editor for politics and Washington correspondent for Blaze Media, joins us now. And Chris, let's start with the big picture of how you think this outcome of this election could impact the future of the country. It's two very diverse countries if one wins versus the other.
It is. And, Republicans and Democrats talk every election about how this is the one that's the most important. This is the election of a lifetime. I'm kind of actually of the opinion that 2012 was the election that Republicans couldn't afford to lose, and a second Barack Obama term basically enshrined a left-wing kind of culture in our government that hadn't really previously existed. So you'd had Ronald Reagan, you'd had H.W. Bush, you'd had George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, who was kind of conservative, basically Trump's policies by today's standards, and all that started to change. But now you've got a Republican Party that went along with this for years. Basically, the post-Reagan Republican Party was kind of comatose. It helped sell out American industry. It helped people on Wall Street get rich. It betrayed a lot of folks who would have been in the working class. Launched a couple of ill-fated wars, and the Democrats kind of helped them along the way. 2016 was so interesting because it was the first time that someone had actually really tried to fight back outside of being controlled opposition. And that's why you saw every lever of the government, including the intelligence, including the Pentagon, going at Donald Trump, trying to undermine Donald Trump. And there was a real push to undo that, to try and get everything back to the continuing march toward progress, or the arc of history sort of stuff that we've seen over the last 4 years. So if Donald Trump wins this election, I think it's going to show that the American public and the Republican Party are willing to actually embrace for real this change in course. By the time he would leave office 4 years later, almost the majority of the American Republican congressmen, and even Democrats too, would have been people who've been elected since Donald Trump had been president, or in between his presidency or his second presidency. He'll have put a real stamp on the agenda, and they seem much better primed to actually carry out that kind of MAGA populist agenda. He's got people like J.D. Vance as opposed to Mike Pence, who is more traditional. He's got folks like Elon Musk who are thinking outside the box. You have the Tucker Carlsons out there. There's a much stronger network of support. And if Kamala Harris wins, I think you'll see a continuation of that rapid decline in the American Republic, mixed with a lot of civil war on the Republican side of, all right, guys, the populists have been given the mantle 3 times. They've won once, and you'll see some bloodletting.
Chris, say more about what you think happens to the country if Kamala wins, regardless of the Republican Civil War. I mean, what does that do? I mean, how does that play out?
I think a major thing would be a warning to those people who've just begun to fight. I was talking to our friend David Azarad the other day, a few years ago, actually, probably a year and a half ago, saying, well, things have just been going so poorly. What makes you think that this can be turned around if decades of conservative ink hadn't done anything? And he pointed out that people had just begun to fight. Donald Trump has pushed on a number of different policy proposals that the Republican Party still can't stand. They have to hold their nose to do it. They have to hold their nose right now to fight, to try and push through, and it looks like it's already collapsing, make it difficult for non-citizens to vote in American elections. They had to fight against their will to actually push back on anything on creating some kind of border security. The Trump administration proved that the federal government can actually have a sizable impact. They had to pull Republicans along on that. When corporations first came around and said, we're going to mandate vaccination on this experimental drug on the American populace and on children, Republicans said, well, Ronald Reagan wouldn't stop that, which is completely insane. When corporations are trying to say, well, we should have access to your children or they're going to kill themselves if we can't mutilate them sexually, Republicans have said, well, the Constitution has no place where I can stand against this sort of evil. That's kind of what this Trump sort of phenomenon represents. And if it's defeated there, if it's defeated at the ballot box, then all those Republicans who just want to go back to the old ways of spending more money on the military, outsourcing corporate wealth, helping the financiers get rich, while the American people can, and dissuading themselves that Americans can at least afford to buy this cheap plastic stuff from China. It's going to continue along their merry way, and there will be no chance, really, of altering the course that's necessary.
Chris, tonight we get the debate between Trump and Kamala Harris. And the last time that Kamala took the stage, she went up against Mike Pence. And the fly was the most talked about thing in the last debate that Kamala Harris was on stage for. So set the scene tonight. What are you looking forward to with this debate?
And since those debates, Kamala Harris has not had a lot of practice. She's had a couple of interviews, and she hasn't done well, even with extremely friendly audiences. She hasn't managed to distinguish herself. She's not had to actually debate her policies. She's been up there laughing and talking about coconut trees and making up stories that can seem to confuse her biography with Martin Luther King's. It's a funny thing. So this will be the first time that she has been actually challenged. And 4 years, basically. And it's also the first time that she's been challenged. The American public is really tuning into this. I don't think many people changed their vote either way based on Kamala Harris versus Mike Pence that you saw in the last sequence. So this will be one of her first debuts. There's going to be an incredible amount of pressure on her. Same people in the media who for months have been saying Donald Trump is a crazy person who can't be trusted, he's completely insane, he's useless, are now saying he's an extremely formidable debate opponent, which is actually probably true. And they're trying to downplay some of the results of Kamala Harris, but she does actually have to do more than just stand up there and survive. She really has to distinguish herself as someone who didn't just copy and paste her policy ideas from Joe Biden's website, which it seems like she actually did. Someone who can stand on her own and be president despite having literally completely skipped the interview process.
And what does Donald Trump need to do, in your mind, then tonight on stage?
Donald Trump, I think, needs a repeat in some ways of his performance in the first debate. I mean, it's really one of the only debates in history I can think of where a modern presidential candidate knocked out the other one in a single blow. You don't usually get that. You get long rounds. You figure it out in November. That's not going to happen. You're not going to see a meltdown on this level. Also, I think that you may want to look out for some more fact checking. You want to probably potentially a much more activist moderator. Trump's in extremely unfriendly territory here. He agreed to this because of Joe Biden. He's going to have to both restrain himself and not appear domineering and appear presidential in some ways, while at the same time driving home the points. And he can't get stuck in some kind of Russian disinformation garbage that the left wing keeps on trying to pull, the Democrats keep trying to pull. He can't be rambling in his answers. He has to stay on point. He has to be disciplined. He has to basically do what we saw in his debate with Joe Biden.